All right, when logs and metrics fail us, how many of you guys, women, guys, dudes, whatever, think of yourselves as being software engineers? Ops types? Wow, only a couple? Cool. And the rest are just curious? Cool. Well, my name is Charity. I am the co-founder of Honeycomb. Starting a company is a thing that I will do only once in my life. So you can be sure that it is as good as I can possibly make it. We have stumbled into trying to build a new way to think about observability, so we're probably going to fail, just like almost everybody who starts a company is going to fail. But hopefully it will be for very good reasons, and we'll get rich. Before that, I was first infrastructure hire at Parse. We got acquired by Facebook. We had over 1 million mobile apps running on us by the time I left. Got shut down by Facebook in January. I'm totally not bitter. I spent 4 or 5 years at Linden Lab actually working on Second Life, and I have a book coming out with Lane. I wrote, Lane has been writing it. I basically stopped writing as soon as I started a company, so there's that. I hate monitoring. I hate it a lot. I'm not just saying that ooh, I hate it. No, I actually deeply despise it and loathe it with every fiber of my being. That's fine. Cool. I actually think it's a good thing because monitoring as we're used to thinking of it is dying, not as quickly as I would like. It should die faster, but it sucks. The software engineering-ification of infrastructure, which goes hand in hand of the operability-ifying ification of software engineering, is killing it, and I'm super glad. And I'm shoveling as much dirt as I can into that hole. And this is true, the statement is true to the extent that you're using newer paradigms, to the extent that you are solving newer problems. And we can argue all day about what these terms mean, and it would be fun, but only if we were drinking. We're not, it's 10 a.m., so. I will define monitoring as, the way that we used to build systems was we would build a thing, we would look at it, we would go, I will predict ways in which this will break, and we monitor for those things, right? We write Nagios checks. Return 0 if good, return 1 if bad, return 2 if questioning. It sucked, right? And then we spent the rest of our grown-up lives cultivating that list of Nagios checks about whether these predicted outputs were in fact what we expected. And most of the time it was just, I have PTSD, that's probably why anyway, it sucks. Monitoring sucks if you define it that way. And lots of people will argue with my definition. That's fine, they're wrong, but they can be wrong. I believe that observability is what we need, right, in the glorious future. Observability in the sense that we can't predict all the ways that this is going to fail. We mostly shouldn't try. We should make sure that we have built a system that is understandable, that we can ask questions of, that we can, craft a story of, that we can link things up and down the stack, from, half your app's brain is stored in a database and half of it's stored in the mobile app. You should be able to correlate events. You should be able to craft a story of what happened based on the details that you instrumented when you were building it, right? And this is a way of thinking of observability as a thing that is part of your software engineering. Anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself. And software engineers are who we need. Now, I come from very much from the operations and DBA side of the world, right? So and I'm not saying that we're going away because we are not going away. Our lives are getting better, but we're increasingly as specialists, right? We're niche. We live on the other side of an API, and we have not done a great job of empowering and educating and making software engineers come with us, right? To understand what they need to build and why they should care, why it's going to make their lives better. We need to recruit them to our cause. There's more software engineers here than ops people, so it was worth the flight. What's changed? In a word, it's complexity. And I thought I was being all original, and then every conference I've been at, speaking at this year, there's been like people just like moaning and groaning about how things are getting so complex, and complexity is, so I feel less original, but it's kind of validation. Like everybody's starting to really struggle with this, which is why I made a super scientific graph. As you can see by my calculations, nobody was going to understand this shit in like a month. And like here's a visualization. We had your lamp stacks. Now I'm starting to feel kind of old because I remember when the P in lamp stack stood for Perl. Woo! And then it became Perl or PHP or Python, right? And we got to choose between MySQL and Postgres, and these are all traumatic events in our lives. But fundamentally, you understood what the question was. The app tier is broken. Okay, let's go find the answer, right? The database is broken. Like, we understood the questions. We may not know the answers. But this is why, like, the typical problems that we had were, database is getting slow. It's like, we take it for granted now, but we could always pretty much identify the question, right? And so that's the question. You monitor it with, these terrible pieces of software. Shell scripts, cron jobs, whatever you can scrap together. Metrics, right? A thing that has been aggregated, it's been collapsed over a unit of time to smush out all of the useful stuff, all the other data, and just give you a number or a delta and alarms that, woke us all up, whatever. And like the thing that we crafted out of this crap is dashboards. Like, let 1,000 dashboards like bloom. Like, it's like the longer you work on a system, the more dashboards it has. By the time like 6 months is up, you start having to have dashboards of dashboards, so you can find your dashboards with your dashboards. Dashboards are a great way of describing how to find the last outage faster. Right? And it just starts to get cruft. It's just like scabbing over itself. Then you get people who are reaping dashboard. It's gnarly. Even the ones who are trying to be interactive, it's like, all right, let's craft this graphite faster. I love dashboards. I don't. The thing about dashboards is they are a stopping point. They tell you to stop here and look at this with your eyeballs. I've literally gotten headaches before. I was just like scanning with my eyeballs, like trying to correlate. All right, I've got these 4 things that I went to look up all at once. But it's still better than what you get when you currently try to stare at modern architectures. Like, is this even still monitoring? Like, modern infrastructures in the sense that they're fluid, right? They're ephemeral, they're transient, they blip in and out of existence. They may or may not have a server or a host even attached to them. They may, they have ephemeral storage stuff. They're microservices sometimes, and that means that so much of the intelligence of an app exists in the network. It exists between the nodes. It exists between anything that you would like SSH to and like do a deep dive onto. Is your system ever completely up or down? No, it's not. It was ever thus, but we just didn't know it. And like we started to have just kind of a cognitive overflow sometimes. It's just like, because here's an example of a problem of the future where, like, same problem, people are complaining, the photos aren't loading. Okay, I've got 50 services, I've got, a dozen different data, and some of them are sharded, and there's no shard keys, and, and it's just like, okay, so the problem here is actually, we don't know the question. We don't know. And when we have dashboards, we're starting to look at all these answers. Well, we don't actually know what the question is. We're just looking at all these answers, and we're like pattern matching to things that have happened, that have scarred us before in our lives. Like, complexity is exploding, and our tools were designed for lamp stacks, right? We have metrics, we have log aggregators, designed in the lamp stack era, and they have come a long way. Like, don't get me wrong, I am not ragging on like the Splunks of the world. They're amazing. If I remember lucky enough to build something half that awesome, I will consider it a job well done. But there's a fair amount of impedance mismatch, I think, when you try to use old tools with new problems. Especially when it comes to just like, as soon as I know what the question is, I know what the answer is, but how do I even figure out what the fucking question is? You know? And if you start looking at it and thinking about it and dreaming about it, like I have been for the last year, you start noticing all these other examples of that, like schemas, indexes, anything that is designed to help you impose discipline at the point where you're gathering data is not going to be a good fit for an era when you don't know what data you need to answer the question that has never happened before, right? You know, like on call for like so long was just the first time you saw a new thing, it was like, it's an engineering problem now, right? It's not a support problem. It's like, okay, we have to engage our creativity. This is an unknown. Who knows how long it'll take to find this? Like remember the first time you ever like tracked down a caching bug? Like, it's hard. And we start to forget that it was hard because it happens over and over, and variants of it happen, and we start to just like, pattern match, and we intuit where a problem is. The first time you encounter any question, it's hard. And, symptoms of the problems are, nothing changed. I didn't change anything. Like, what is the greatest driver of chaos in the universe? Well, it's your humans, right? So that's why everyone should be drawing a little vertical line in all their graphs whenever a deploy happens, or whenever a cron job runs, or something that we know is a human injecting chaos into the system. Site goes down, everyone's like, all right, who just did something? Well, what about when nobody just did anything, What about when you have these weird things like latency is fine on Tuesdays? I did not make this up. I want to help software engineers be on call, and I feel like 3 years ago is when I really started thinking about this and asking the software engineers that asking is a nice way of putting it. I'm like, you're on call now, welcome to your new life. And they complained, as they should. It was not reasonable. It was not a reasonable request. Because given the tooling that we had at the time, given I was asking them to do 2 jobs, If they wanted to add a metric, deploy it, they had to learn everything about how Chef worked, how infrastructure worked, how AWS worked, how, Zookeeper and like all of this service discovery and everything, That's not a reasonable request, actually. Asking someone to do 2 jobs is not a reasonable request. We were going in the right direction. We just didn't really have the tools. I don't want to ask anyone to do 2 jobs. I just want to give people tools to do their job better. In this talk, I want to try and help convince you that event-driven systems for debugging and analysis are the future, and that the faster we get there, the better off we're all going to be. What else did I write in this slide? Oh, there's complaining about my eyeballs. Yeah, and I want to call your attention to some characteristics of these data stores. Problems, nobody gets out there and is like, what I really need in my life is high cardinality, high dimensionality, exploratory system for my data. But I actually think that's what you need. You're just not used to thinking of it in these terms. High cardinality, right? Like, we ran into this at Parse when, at the time we got acquired, we had 60,000 apps-ish. And we had built a system that was effectively undebuggable by some of the best software engineers in the world and best ops people in the world. Couldn't debug it. At the rate that things were coming in. For example, a user would write in, an app developer would write in and be like, my app is down. Why is Parse down? And I'd be like, motherfucker, look at my fucking wall. Like, I got all these graphs. Like, look at my beautiful dashboards. To tell you exactly how not down Parse is. Like, I've put weeks into these things. They're all aggregates, right? They don't show you maxes. They probably show you 99th percentile. They might show you 99.9. Do they show you 99.999 percentile? In fact, the user would be correct. Parse would be down for him, and only him. Because, for example, he would have deployed a query that every time that he hit /login, it was hitting this query that was doing 5 full table scans. Well, far as he's concerned, parse it down. And he doesn't care. Here's what it took me a long time to internalize. He does not care how not down parse is. He cares, I am losing credibility every moment that I argue with him instead of having an accurate representation of the world that he is experiencing. This is a platform problem, right? Platforms, I feel like increasingly are going to be all of our lives because the richness that users and developers demand of us is like increasing, right? And a platform is effectively just, a thing that you build that is flexible enough for other people to build things on top of it. Right? And so by its very nature, you're going to have lots and lots and lots of one-offs. In fact, it's all one-offs. So it's like, I think I have a slide here. It's like, you don't have a needle in a haystack. You have like a stack of needles. And every single one of them wants your personal attention at some point. Right? You know how Datadog monitors Datadog? They generate a list of the top 50-ish customers by volume every night and then pre-generate dashboards of each of them each night. High cardinality means you can break down by that 1 in a million and then break down by every combination of everything else without sacrificing speed. Fucking mind-blowing, dude. It is like magic. Everybody wants this. They just don't know that they want it because they haven't had it. They don't know it's possible. Tags are like a poor man's way of like slapping dimensions onto a columnar or onto metrics. But they're limited because of the write amplification, right? You get 50 tags, you're doing 50 additional writes. Doesn't work. Where was I? I care too much about storage engines. Dimensionality, right? You want to be able to store events that are wide, arbitrarily wide. You want to store all of the detail about here are all the things that happened at once. Here is all the detail that I have about what happened at the same time. Anyway, problems of the future look as weird as this. Aggregates disguise problems so much. People are complaining, but all my graphs and dashboards look fine. Has anyone here not had that happen to you? Good, no liars. In the future, problems get tougher. And part of it is a factor of, how everybody's been talking, well, the ops people started bitching about how, microservices and all these things are not actually, containers, are not actually solving problems. They're pushing it down the line that these taxes are going to have to be paid. Oh, well, this is it. It is better. It is better. It is a better version of the future. I do believe that. But you've pushed a lot of complexity out of the developing of the software and into the operating of the software. Operability. It's hard. Aggregates destroy detail. And events tell stories. I think that this is underappreciated by basically everyone. And I think that this is because, let's think about it. Why do we have metrics? You talk to anyone else who does any other kind of engineering or science, pretty much, and you're like talking about metrics, and like, what are you talking about? I talk about like metrics debugging and events debugging, and they're like, oh, event-based debugging, you mean like debugging? Like, why would you ever strip away all this data? Don't you need that detail? I'm like, yeah, you kind of do. But if you think about it, it's because we started having these websites with very high traffic 10, 20 years ago. And resources were incredibly expensive, right? Hard drives were expensive, CPUs were expensive. RAM was just like, oh my God, you couldn't pay for that. You'd sell your child. And so we were like, what is the least amount of data that we can possibly get something useful out of? And thus a metric was born. It was born to have very little detail. And we've been just kind of slowly packing back on some of that richness. Events tell stories because you can tell what was happening at once. I have seen so many engineers interacting with the Scuba system at Facebook, and as they become used to constructing events as they're writing software, and as they get used to asking questions interactively of their events as they're observing their software, and they become better engineers. I think this is inevitable. I think it's necessary. We have to become better engineers because the systems that we're building are so complex that they demand it of us. There's my needle slide. And what's actually funny is that like it's all in motion. It's not a haystack. If it was a haystack, it'd be cool, right? You could draw a map. No, it's all like a hurricane. You can quote me on that. The future is a hurricane of needles. And in the future, there are no easy problems, right? There are only hard problems because you fucking fix that shit. Right? You're not, okay, if anyone's getting paged, if they're just like getting paged going, oh, that again. Oh, that again. Oh, I know what that is. Oh, that's, like, fucking fix that shit. Like, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, which is perhaps at first, but in the future, like we are getting rid of categories of these problems. I never go to the data center anymore. I have not gone and plugged and unplugged a server in like 12 years. Is that a true statement? It's close enough to true. I don't deal with those categories of problems. I use APIs now. They're super cool. There are only harder problems. There are only, I'm going to say, optimally, like the future that we're driving towards is a situation where you only get paged about things that are unknown problems. Only the unknown unknowns, right? If it's a known unknown, it's a support problem. If it's a known unknown, it is something that can be remediated, hopefully automatically. Or, if it still needs human decision making, then, via a runbook or something. It's not a hard problem. And there are more of them. There are a lot more of them coming down the pipe. So we have to get we have to get really good at understanding how to, it can't be this thing where it's like, you literally don't know if it's going to take you a minute or a day or a week or never, And this is a sense that that most of us are not good at right now because we have spent so long answering known problems. Have you ever experienced this thing it's like dashboard blindness, where because you didn't ever think to graph a thing or forgot to graph a thing on the same page as another thing, it's like it doesn't exist. And you're just like looking at all these things and frantically, just like in a frenzy, just like, oh, what is it? And look at all these things. And so he's like, oh, isn't that thing that we haven't yet installed any graphs for? Well, yeah, duh, obvious it's that thing. But it's like this blindness, because we get snapped into the mode of like looking, debugging with our eyeballs. And that's not really debugging, honestly. It's pattern matching. It's leaning on intuition. This is the stuff that burns out senior engineers. If we're not good at reasoning about our systems, about asking questions, about like understanding the causal effects, the ripple effects, this is why the only way to debug a thing is by who's been there the longest or who was around when the thing was built. Like for so many reasons, this is a pattern that we just have to get out of. It's like a muscle, I feel like when we went to the metrics world, we stopped. I've seen people when they're using Honeycomb, like new grads who haven't yet had any operational experience whatsoever, find it categorically easier to use Honeycomb and just interact with their data than like very senior, seasoned systems people, because they're like, oh, interesting. I will interact with this thing and not I'm looking for things. Does that make sense? I don't know. It's weird. This is where my Conan meme was going to go. No, it's even crooked. What is good in life? Context is key. When you're looking for an unknown, when you're exercising your creative muscles to like ask a question about what's happening in your complex system, having details that maybe they've never been important before. Not being incentivized to go, okay, we'll shed those to save space. Most of them are going to be useful someday. If you thought it was useful enough to gather it at one point, it's probably going to be useful someday. Context is key. Correlation across widespread systems is key. Unification with tools. I feel like so much of the silo building that we all hear about is actually done with our tools. And it's done because one team installs a tool and gets really good at it. Another team installs another tool and gets really good at it. And now their tools have to fight. Like, these teams will spend more time arguing about the nature of reality as reflected by their respective tools than about the actual problem, which arguably lives on one or both sides, right? This is a huge problem, and it has to fall. I am also so fucking pissed. Sorry, is Texas. I'm allowed to curse here. Okay. The wall between all of the like hot people, like and like monitoring cool kids these days are all about black box and white box. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care. I want all of it, all in the same place. Why do I care? I don't care. Gather it all, like God sorted out. Also, the wall between APM and vendors. APM being, the new relics of the world. Like the code that you write yourself. Right now, they're separated for some reason. I don't understand. The code you write yourself is always kept in a different place than the code that vendors have written. And there's no reason for that. Just like gather it all in the same place, and like, yeah. I'm so irritated with so many of these like. Oh, Conan, you're so pretty. This is an issue. If your tools do not handle extreme outliers, if your tool can't give you a max, it's not a good tool. If you can't define the aggregator, it's not a good tool. Or if your tools don't give you the ability to correlate across far-flung systems, vendors, and application data. And this is not, you could look at this as like me like subtweeting about, oh, Honeycomb's so cool. I swear to God, this is not actually a, well, okay, it is a little bit. I'm here because it's worth it to us for marketing purposes for me to be talking about shit. But it's more like I've been immersed in this category of problems for a year and 5 months and 13 days. And it's all I think about. And we're not solving all these problems. We're solving a lot of them. But I kind of feel that this is like a call to action. Like, I'm like, guys, please, like, these are the things that we need to be building. Like, the amount of complexity that's coming down the pipe is not slowing, right? It's not slowing. It's getting faster. It's getting crazier. And we can pay for these in ways that are intentional, or we can pay for these, like, with our lifeblood. Not to be dramatic. Can I just talk about, like, fucking structured data for a minute? Why are we still allowing people to like write unstructured logs on production systems? Unstructured logs, cool, and then like they feed into some god-awful monstrosity that has an ingestion component that exists solely to have a lot of regular expressions that are applied against all that data, just to structure the goddamn data. Like, and that's the first thing to go down, and the regular expressions are never right, and this is why it's so expensive, right? Because you break your regular expressions all the time, you have to store the raw version of it, and then you have to store like the decomposed version of it, and then because like schemas and indexes, then you're going to store like another like right for every column that you want to be able to index on. Indexing your own data is really insulting in this. Like, I'm not going to pay millions of dollars for the privilege of doing distributed crap over my own goddamn logs. Like, that's just... There's a better way to do this. It's called don't accept a code review for production system with an unstructured event, right? Just structure it. It's actually not harder. It's actually easier because it kind of tells you what is expected, Structure. Like, Carter wrote this amazing blog post about like the benefits of structured logs. I should put that up there, but if you haven't read it, read it. Angry. Come on, regular expressions don't actually belong in production. It's 2017. The only time that an unstructured logline is better than a structured logline is if its intended consumer is a human. Like if you're debugging it in your terminal. In that case, like, be my guest. Joe Beto was like arguing with me on Twitter about this. He's the guy who wrote Kubernetes. And normally I will defer to Joe in like almost anything. Turns out he was like arguing with me because he was like, well, my 8-year-old doesn't find it as easy. I'm like, all right, Joe, your 8-year-old is allowed to write unstructured logs until she's 10. After she's 10, I'm sorry. Yeah, logs are useless, honestly. Use events. And really the time when, what did I just do? When a metric is useful, there are some cases when metrics are way more useful than events. There are. Counters, way more useful. Super, super high performance stuff, where it's like a thing that you care about independently of describing what's happening or performance. Super useful. Yeah. In the glorious future, we all have platform problems, like more and more and more. User-defined behaviors are astronomically harder to debug because there's no engineer in your building who's doing it. You cannot go throw things at anyone, right? You're reduced to like debugging something that somebody wrote when they were drunk at 2 a.m. in Finland, and you're just like, what is this? Why do I need 5 full table scans? Well, the answer is they didn't. They just didn't understand what they were doing. The thing that most platforms, sidebar, can do to compete is make it really clear what is happening under the hood. Parse is bad about this. We all have high cardinality problems because we all need to represent the world as seen by a user, pretty much across the board. We all have high dimensionality problems because we all cannot predict all of the data that we're going to need. And hard problems break down into 50 black swans at once, 50 times a day. And this is like another slide about, okay, there we go. So there are 2 main approaches out there that I'm aware of that I'm talking about here. And one is honeycombs, and one is distributed tracing, which is super cool. And honeycomb is like taking a very breadth-first approach, and Lightstep and the distributed tracers, Zipkin folks, are taking very depth-first. I think that the hardest thing about distributed tracing is knowing what you should trace. That kind of gets back to the whole, as soon as you know the question, you know the answer. But I'm somewhat being unfair to them just because I'm not as familiar with what they're doing. Are you guys running Elasticsearch here for your stuff? Elk Stack, anyone? How do you feel about yourselves? Okay, thank you. I have mad respect for Elasticsearch as a textual search engine. I did not think I would be textual searching my events in 2017. grep forever. We need more. There should be more. I feel like the bar has just been so low for so long that we accept all this crap. We can have nice things, right? And to me, whenever I think about, is there a business case for Honeycomb? Sure seems that like we're trying to do a whole bunch of new things. I just look at all the duct tape and crap that people are doing. And this is like, it's all one-offs. Like every shop is doing all of these one-offs and it hurts me. Like, it reminds me of like, so I was running, I was at Linden Lab back when I was running Postfix and like ClamAV and Spam Assassin, like training everybody's like antivirus and stuff every night. And I remember when Gmail came out and I didn't want to use it. I was like, no way. I read my mail spool with grep. I'm not going to give that up. What if Gmail goes down? You know, I was totally that asshole. I did it anyway, and within 2 months, I was glad. Right? I do feel like this is kind of the stage that we're in with metrics. And to be clear, I've been on the train for a long time, saying you should only do the things in-house that are critical to your key business objectives. But for a long, long, long time, until about 2 years ago, I was like, but metrics, logging, all this stuff is key to any engineering team. Like that could not be outsourced. That is too critical, too, et cetera. It changed when it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, Baron Schwartz asked me to do a review of Vivid Cortex. I spent a week. I did a deep dive on it. You can read it. It's up there on the internet. And it's just my review of Vivid Cortex. And at the end, I'm like, yeah, this is the future. I could never run a service as good as this for my own databases. And I was pretty proud of my own database, blah, 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 crap. Could never do it as good as he does it. And furthermore, there's the bonus thing of when you have a systemic problem, it affects your own fucking monitoring systems too, right? They're the first to go down because it's like this, one proceeds from the other. It really does make sense, I think. So I started a company. Context is everything. You want exploration, and I'm getting towards the end here. I think 5 more minutes. You do not want to give people the impression that they know the answer when they're looking at a graph. You know a question. You know some data. It's a starting point. It's a jumping off point. In order to do this, you must have raw events. You cannot explore with aggregates. I won't rant about that. I've ranted a bit. You debug by asking questions, by thinking. I was on a beach in my honeymoon when I got a call, parse is down, we're sorry, but it's been down for an hour. It might be down forever as far as we know. Nobody can get it back up. I'm just like, I don't have my laptop, but I'll just start asking you questions. And like 5 questions, and I'm like, oh, no, never mind, it's Redis. And they're like, what do you mean? There's nothing about Redis in any of these graphs. I'm like, I know, I smell it. Like, just trust me, it's Redis. Of course it was Redis. And that's not because I'm a genius. It's because I built it. This doesn't scale. It feels great the first time you get to be the hero. By the 10th or the 20th or the 30th time, no, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's not good for your life. It's not good for anyone's life. It's not good for the junior person's life. When they join, they know that they can never catch up with like the people who just happen to have been there the longest. And the only reason that this is like the state of the art is because we haven't had good tools. If we're doing data-driven debugging, and I've seen this shift, this is not me talking out of my ass for once. I've seen this shift in companies happen. Shift to data-driven debugging, and suddenly the people who are good at debugging can debug the best. Small thing. Also, debugging is a social act. Like, it so is. You know, we like to think of ourselves as these like giants of debugging, you know, sprung forth from academia, fully formed or something. I don't know. It's bullshit. Good debuggers are good debuggers. Good engineers are good engineers because they were lucky enough to work next to someone who was not selfish with their knowledge. You know, good engineers who shared, who trained, who gave good code reviews, who were very detailed. I got one guy that I know says that he learned everything that he knows about operations from reading other people's bash histories. I thought about it for a minute, and I'm like, oh my God, me too. You know, when I was in college, I just go around reading everyone's bash histories, and that's how I learned how to use Linux. HPUX, but we debug on the shoulders of giants. We should look for ways to like empower this, not to, you know. And if you think about the mechanics of debugging, so we're like doing this collaborative stuff in Honeycomb. The mechanics of debugging are the same, even if it's just you collaborating with your past self and your future self, right? It's still social. It's still you're trying to leave breadcrumbs for your dumbass future self to like figure out what you're thinking right now. You know, you're still like trying to parse, what did that idiot do? Like that, oh, it was me. You know, the mechanics are still social. Which is why it's so crazy to me that like we've gone from you know, traditional monitoring to in Silicon Valley right now, the hot shit is all predictive analytics and you know, machine learning and anomaly detection and stuff, and they're jumping right over the giant question of what does the person sitting next to you think? What does your team do? What did the last few people who were on call think was important? You know, it's so funny to me, so ironic that like. Once again, we're like, well, let's just cut out the humans and let the robots do all the work. I tell you, if you tell me that your machine can give me answers, or the person that I've been working with for the past 6 months can tell me what I should look at, I'm going to pick, you know, that dude, because false positives are expensive too. Solving new problems is incredibly cognitively expensive. Sharing is not. And doing a better job of history is not. We've been implementing this feature that's just like your bash history, right, for every question that you ask. I love that. You know, honestly, I said this at the beginning. I hate this problem set. I am doing this out of loathing and hatred. I never want to have to do this again. But like my friend Ben, I've hired him 3 times now because he loves this stuff. You know, he's one of those guys, you'll see him up late into the night, you know, crafting this perfect, you know, graph that tells the story of something. He loves it. He's good at it. I am super good at coming in the next morning and bookmarking it. And like adding a little description to myself, and I put it in my arsenal, right? This is one of my tools now. Thanks, Ben. Why fight that? We don't all have to love the same things. You know, if you give those people the ability to have greater impact, and not everybody has to be a specialist in it, you know, our tools can help bring everyone up to the level of the best debugger. Software engineers. The future is software engineering centric. And that's why the next generation of tools has to be SDKs and APIs. That's it. None of this, you know, learn to configure Graphite, learn to deploy it via Chef yourself. That's why we went all in on SaaS. It's a SaaS. We have a compliance data option, and also Production is not just for ops, right? I feel like we need to start thinking of everything that we have been bucketing as monitoring and just put it in the unit tests in production. If you're not watching it run in production, you're not actually watching it, right? Because it's like your unit test. Like, how much can you tell about how this shit's going to run on your laptop? Sorry, you can't. But like, people watch their unit test run, and then they just ship it. What the hell? Like, you need to be like elbows deep in production. You need to be looking at it when it's healthy, not just when it's broken. Because if you're not looking at it regularly when it's healthy, you don't actually know what healthy looks like, right? Things are broken all the time. Your system is never completely up. That terrifies software engineers the first few times that they start to internalize it. They're like, oh, what's that error? I'm like, dude, you just have this all the time. It's like, shouldn't we fix it? I love your enthusiasm. Not optional, right? Never hire a software engineer that refuses to look at their own stuff in production. Never promote to senior engineer. Somebody who does not take responsibility for their own services. Even like your iOS and Android engineers should be interested in what happens after I hit deploy, right? They should care about instrumentation and observability. And a lot of this work you can do with culture. You don't have to make rules and laws and stuff. You just value it. Pay your ops people the same as you pay your software engineers, the same as you pay your managers, right? Factor it into promoting. The fundamentals of designing and maintaining a service on the internet, everything else is just abstractions. Software engineering teams that are good at this don't happen by accident. They happen because people care and cultivate it. And like, honestly, I'll throw this out there too. If quality is not in your mission statement, if it doesn't matter to you, then fuck it. Forget everything I just said. Like, don't over-optimize for stuff that doesn't matter for you. But if you care about quality services, you need to support your engineers in growing new muscles. Watch it run in production. I love this quote from Gregory. I was just watching the Monorama talks because I haven't written mine yet. It's next week. He said, start thinking about your system like it's a complex distributed system and you'll be fine. Like, the ways in which systems are failing are the ways in which distributed systems researchers have been telling us about for like 10 years. Observability is TDD for production. Don't ship without it. And monitoring is dead. That's it. Thanks.